Michael Penix Jr., Jonathon Brooks, Brock Bowers. They're all highly rated NFL draft prospects coming off prolific collegiate careers. They've also had their careers dotted with injuries at various points in their careers. With the NFL draft coming up and their professional careers immediately following, how are those injuries following them and potentially impacting their rookie years and beyond? We're diving into that, as well as hitting on someone who's the subject of very many questions going into the 2024 season, nuestro amigo Nick Chubb. Listen up, because bienvenidos and welcome to the Injury Prone Podcast. I'm Jorge Martin, mi compadre next to me, Dr. Edwin Porras. He's the brains of the operation. I'm the one who makes sure he speaks clear English. Maybe a little bit of Spanish, Spanglish in there too, mis amigos y amigas. So, compa, this is the first of a couple shows we're talking about prospects. How important is this information as we start to weave these players into the fantasy football and the NFL landscapes?
No, I think it's extremely important, George. One of the things that I tell people often when it comes to injury analysis is just the fact that being ahead of your league mates is quite literally half of the battle. If you know the specifics of an injury, if you know when the surgical date was, people are slowly catching on, but injuries in general are still an edge that a lot of gamers need to exploit, and that's what we're here to do. So let's do it.
Well, also want to make sure before we jump in, you're following the Injury Prone Podcast on YouTube. Por favor, get that like, get that subscribe. We're going to be getting regular shows from here on out, all the way through to the season, and then there's going to be even more regular shows. And also want to make sure getting into the patreon.com/injuryprone. Get in there. There's, Edwin's always got some great information coming up. But yeah, you mentioned a little bit of, so much of that information, the injuries and looking back. So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about so much is the injury date, their recovery timeline and everything like that. So, the first one that we're going to be talking about is actually got a very, very checkered history. So, we've got a couple of knee injuries in there, shoulder injuries. What do we worry about? What don't we worry about? Michael Penix Jr. He had a 6-year collegiate career at Indiana. First 4 years at Indiana, the last 2 years at Washington. Very prolific the last 2 years. But now, as always seems to happen with the NFL draft, they start picking at all the little nits and everything like that. He had so many injuries in his background after 2 healthy seasons. But how much are we worried about him?
I think somewhere in the middle. I'm not panicking on Michael Penix Jr. I can understand why some NFL organizations would be concerned. I mean, it's not necessarily normal to have a dislocated AC joint and then a sprain, I guess, and then a dislocated SC joint and then 2 ACLs on the same knee. At the same time, you could look at it through the same lens and say, yeah, that seems a little fluky. Now, the ACL is probably less fluky. You don't necessarily want to be trotting out there on your revised ACL that is at an increased risk of injury. That's probably why Michael Penix Jr. doesn't run as much as, other quarterbacks. He's actually really good, and people were surprised at how good he tested from an athletic perspective. But that's probably just either based on apprehension or based on advice that he's getting. But he knows where his bread is buttered. He's not necessarily the most accurate, but if he can throw it into a window where his receivers can go up and get it, he's going to do that as opposed to run. So, can he run? Yes. Will he run? Probably not if he didn't run at in college. But in terms of worry, I graded him at, the slightly above to significantly above average range. I do think that there's some cause for concern. Given his ceiling, there's probably no real reason to reach for him in dynasty drafts and stuff like that. But there is some moderate concern because those ACLs probably have a shelf life. And if we're talking, let's say Penix is, I don't know, let's project him to be a solid backup quarterback, right? Sort of on that Geno Smith range that could, something like that seems like it could happen to him at some point in his career. I wonder, I don't have data on this. I wonder how long the ACL will hold up if he plays that long. So it's really a longevity concern with him. So we'll see how he progresses. So yes, there is some moderate concern, but I'm not necessarily freaking out about him.
Considering the fact that, we've now seen a few players who've had ACLs on the same leg, and the fact that these were both on his left leg, which is his plant leg, from throwing, him being a left-handed thrower. I mean, and the fact that he had it at a fairly young age. So he had one in 2020, and let me see what it was. Well, one in 2018 and one in 2020. So it's been a while. It's now been 4 years, coming up on 4 years since the second one. Has there been enough time that really just things are lessened? And we have seen pocket, you talked about pocket passers who don't run a lot. Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins have both made pretty healthy salaries when they are protected. So he has to almost go into a perfect environment. But has there been enough time that even after the second ACL that, concerns are more alleviated because he's been able to be fairly healthy?
I think it's less about time and more about what he's doing from a prevention standpoint, right? What kind of maintenance program is he on? What is he doing from a day-to-day basis? How is he treating his body? How is he recovering? And honestly, unfortunately, a lot of this also comes down to biology. I mentioned the shelf life of an ACL. We're about to find out how long is the shelf life of an ACL. Now, there are some very strange cases where, and it's probably more common than we really realize. Some people get an ACL done, and 10 years later, for whatever reason, they're having some knee issues. They get the MRI. It's unrelated to the ACL, or at least not directly related. And they find out, oh, look, your ACL has been dead for the last 5 years or something, right? Like, that is possible to happen. You hear about, what's his name from Tennessee, the Tennessee running back. And I'm blanking on his name right now.
Oh, Tyjae Spears.
Yeah, Tyjae Spears. I don't know how much is true about him, whether he does or does not have ACLs. I don't really know the truth. It's possible. It's possible that he's fine, right? That's always in the cards. I don't want to be hard and fast about anything, but it's really more so, like I said, what he's doing on a day-to-day to stay healthy. And any team that drafts him, I promise you, they're bringing him into a room and they're saying, what is your maintenance program? Here's the head athletic trainer. Go down to the gym, and the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get on a good, if they're a sharp organization, which again remains to be seen. We'll see where Penix lands.
No, that's gonna be very interesting. I mean, when it comes to that, he is, to me, one of the wild cards of this NFL draft, because you talked about him as being a potential backup, but you hear some of the people talking about it now. They're talking, some of the draft experts are talking like he could be a starter. He could be a first round pick. They're talking about the Raiders as a possibility for him. Of course, 2 years ago, we heard Malik Willis as a possibility for being the number 2 overall pick in the draft, and now he's probably going to be on his second team. So you just never know with that. So you're right. It comes down to maintenance, how he takes care of himself. He's probably taking good care of himself, considering the fact that he's been able to stay fairly upright. I mean, very healthy the last 2 years. It helps that he's had like offensive tackles that are going to be playing in the NFL, blocking for him, and NFL receivers. So maybe he gets into that kind of situation. So one of the most intriguing guys. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun keeping an eye on him. Now we're going to another intriguing guy. This guy has been one of the most hyped guys. The tight end that he's supposed to be better than Kyle Pitts. He's supposed to be the next Gronk. Though when we saw him at the Super Bowl, standing next to Gronk, he looked like a high school senior standing next to his dad. But no, Brock Bowers, the Georgia tight end. He's considered more than a tight end. He gets lined up in the slot. He gets lined up all over the place. Just a wonderful player. He was having an electric junior season. Then he had a high ankle sprain, had tightrope surgery, similar to what Tua Tagovailoa had his final year in the NFL. He came back and played. It's probably question mark whether he came back too quickly. But amigo, what considering the fact that he had a little hamstring stuff going on, I mean, what should fantasy managers be worried about and maybe not worried about?
Sorry, dropped off for a second there. The number one thing about Brock Bowers is his lack of history, right? So he had the high ankle, which those are very incidental. Those happen. They happen to every position on the field. Not a big deal. The fact that he came back so quickly and then not that long after really and realistically in the grand scheme of things, not that long after had hamstring issues. Not really not that surprising per se. Just watch the hamstring a little bit, but it is absolutely not a reason to fade him in any way. I'm not concerned about Bowers. I don't think most people are, but if you were, any injury that he sustains is going to be, unless it's another high ankle sprain, it's probably going to be a fluke. So I wouldn't worry too much about him.
The hamstring, though, you're not concerned over that kind of slowed him down. And I know he's supposed to be running on his pro day any day now.
You know, it's not an issue. At the same time, we really don't know the true severity. Is it tightness? Was it a strain? Was it, was it really that big of a deal? We don't really know how severe it is. On the worst end of the spectrum, okay, let's say it was a legit hamstring strain. Okay, he's at risk for another hamstring strain, but that's still, from a career projection standpoint, not a reason to fade him, in my opinion.
Quick FYI, I looked it up. I remembered that he did have his pro day. He just had his pro day, and he did run, and he ran a 4.53 in the 40s. So for a guy who's about 245 pounds, 6'3", 245 pounds, that's that's going to be moving. Anything you're going to be watching, going into, rookie mini camp, OTAs, training camp, any warning signs you're looking for?
No warning signs, really, unless that hamstring carries over into training camp, into mini camp. Those are the injuries that you watch for. But other than that, no, I'm not concerned about Bowers.
Love it. All right, compa. Now this one's going to test you. Jonathon Brooks, and not just because he spells Jonathan with an O-N. I had to make sure to check that. But Jonathon Brooks out of Texas, he started for 1 year because a guy named Bijan Robinson started ahead of him for a couple years before that. Had a wonderful season this year, but it was cut short with an ACL tear, a torn ACL, which, gosh, how long ago was that the death knell? Now they're coming back, but it's the timing of it all. So I want you to kind of run down the timeline and what you kind of like you're looking at, and we could talk a little bit about him.
For sure. So Brooks had his surgery, based on some of the stuff that we're looking at, approximately December 5th. Now, what that means is most surgeons, again, we're talking most surgeons, excluding Chris Godwin in 22, excluding Michael Gallup in 22, those guys, most surgeons will release most guys at 9 months. And that's because there's like a 7 times more likely chance of a re-tear if you come back as an athlete prior to the 9-month mark. I've said that over and over and over again. Does it mean that they won't come back before 9 months? No, that's not what it means. But does it mean that they will probably play it cautiously? Maybe, right? So if we talk 9 months from his date of surgery, week 1 is in the cards. But what that would mean is he got full reps in practice. He got full reps in training camp before that. He got full reps in mini camp, which that is the issue. That is the hang up with Brooks. Is he going to know the pass protections? Is he going to know, whatever quarterback he has, like his preferences when he's checking down? Is he going to know the playbook? Obviously, running backs can come in and be a lot more efficient than something like a wide receiver. But the issue with Brooks is he's not going to be full speed. Let's call it 8 months. Let's say he hits the ground running 8 months. That's August. That's the middle of training camp. That gives the guy like 3 or 4 weeks to get everything down, for the coaches to trust him. And on top of that, is he going to be on a snap count? Who's going to draft him? What team is he going to be on the Cowboys, right? If he gets placed on the Cowboys, right? If he goes to the Cowboys, we know that they brought Michael Gallup back, and he admitted it. It was way too early, right? They let Zeke play through a PCL sprain, right? The Cowboys and Jerry Jones, they are literally, no pun intended, it's the Wild West out there. They'll put him out there, and I would not be shocked if they put him out there. If they do, I have a hard time seeing him staying healthy if they just hit the ground running with him from a secondary injury perspective. But I do see it happening. If he goes to a team like the Lions, who already played it with Jamison Williams extremely slow when he came off his ACL, then we're probably not going to see Brooks until after Halloween do anything that's significant, right? So what I'm saying with Brooks is it possible that he's back by week 1? It's certainly possible. Just keep in mind, the only guys that come back since 2012 at 9 months or before that, Adrian Peterson, and I'm relatively certain, I need to fact check this for myself, I'm relatively certain it was also someone random like Giovanni Bernard or something like that. So most running backs won't come back until at least the 10-month mark. So what I think will happen with Brooks, if he goes to a sane organization that's not the Cowboys, they might pup him, right? They'll put him on the pup that, hey, you're going to be placed on the pup. It's a 4-week pup. It's going to give you a chance to look at the playbook, and B, a chance to continue to ramp up in the weight room, out on the practice field, on your own individual drills, really ramp up your workloads. We're going to protect the investment that we used, and then we'll bring you back in week 5, whatever the case may be, and we'll let you go. Right. I know that's a really wide array of options for Brooks, but that's because we're sitting here pre-draft and we have more questions than answers. But I can tell you, if everything goes 100% smoothly, it's possible to see Brooks playing in an NFL uniform in week 2, 3, but that doesn't mean, again, return does not mean perform. Regardless of what team he goes to, I know I mentioned the Halloween date. I wouldn't necessarily expect Brooks to be, 100% Jonathan Brooks breaking out until Halloween or later.
And this kind of reminds me a little bit, I didn't put it in the show sheet. I should have looked it up beforehand, but Todd Gurley, we had his ACL tear during his final season, and he missed he was put on the PUP list the first 4 games, and he missed a chunk of the season. Also, I was thinking of Breece Hall, one of the guys that I think you nailed last year, how, the timeline of it. You said he had his probably about, I think it was October of the previous year. So he was almost at 11 months, or he was at like the 10 or 11th month mark when he came back, and he was still limited for about the first 4 weeks of the season. So maybe I think we're kind of looking at that. Yeah, Brooks, I'm gonna put this on Twitter. I'll put this on Twitter and tag Edwin on it when I get Todd Gurley's timeline after we post this one. So yeah, landing spot's going to be a big deal, and this is a guy we're going to really follow very closely throughout training camp, right?
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as he's drafted, I'm going to be looking at the team and what their history is and how they typically bring guys back. But yeah, this is a guy that you're going to want to monitor closely. Again, don't draft if you're an absolute sicko, like some people listening I know are, and you're drafting already. Don't draft Jonathan Brooks with the idea that he's going to do anything for you in the first month of the season. He's definitely going to be a back half of the season type of guy, regardless of what team picks him.
Yeah, I like that Halloween timeline, kind of like using Halloween as kind of like the point of demarcation for him, kind of that Mason-Dixon line. So, all right, well, we're going to leave the NFL draft for a second, and we're going to jump to one of the players that I know you've been getting a lot of questions about him, and it just so happens that we just found out that, Nick Chubb just got his contract restructured. So it got turned into about a 1-year deal with incentives. So I don't know. I mean, I think we talked about it. This was one of the most gruesome injuries, the way it looked when it happened last year during the season. Had to have multiple surgeries. Can you break down kind of like the timelines after each of the surgeries and what kind of his outlook is going to be going into the season, if he's going to be ready by the time the season starts?
Yeah, Chubb is tricky. They did just restructure his contract. The issue with Nick Chubb in particular, and I don't know if I still have the spreadsheet, the 2023 spreadsheet, so I can open this up and make sure that I'm giving accurate information. But yes, you said it. Chubb had 2 different surgeries. The reason, and this is actually not that uncommon, there are athletes and players who will have their meniscus repaired and then go back in and repair the ACL. I was surprised to find, based on the injury, that there was no PCL damage reported. There was no capsular damage reported, anything like that. I find that interesting. I'm curious. You typically don't see an MCL that's isolated, but of course, I guess in theory, it's not isolated. It comes with the meniscus and the ACL. I digress. Moral of the story here is he had his first surgery in September for the MCL and the meniscus. Those meniscus injuries, if they're a full-blown repair on their own, I mean, we're talking months, right? Like 3-4 months until he's really right, 4 months to ramp up. So we assume this was a full repair. Then he turned around, and in his second surgery, which was, let's see here, 2 surgeries. I lost the date of when his second surgery. I think it was November. So we're talking November, 9 months. No, 9 months from November, just like we talked about earlier with Brooks, is the target date for a lot of teams, right? So we're sitting here, what that would be around August, right? So the mid-August timeline when he would really start to ramp up his activity. What would make sense to me is you ramp up Nick Chubb through months 9 until month 10. You see where he's at in month 10, because the meniscus issue is really where you're really concerned with Nick Chubb, because those things can really linger even a year after. You can have continued persistent swelling. You can have persistent clicking, popping that's painful. It can lock up on you from a mobility perspective. You could get scar tissue, pretty gnarly scar tissue, the way that we heard J.K. Dobbins, happen to go through. There are just a lot of, on top of the ACL, right? On top of the complications that come after an ACL. With Nick Chubb, it would make sense to me, given the fact that he's also had another major injury to that same knee, PCL in college. It would make sense to me to get him through training camp, reassess a week or two before the season, ask him where he's at ask him where he's at, how he feels. Obviously, special test, right? Looking at, not special test, but just any criteria you can look at through a sports PT, AT lens to understand where he is at from a functional perspective, and then go from there. I think there's a chance he starts on the PUP and they bring him back in month 11. I would say that's probably on the later end. There's another chance, right? The mid-case scenario here is that they don't play him for the first 2 or 3 weeks. He can come back before that PUP rule, right? In week 4 or so, they don't put him on the PUP. I think that's the most likely scenario. And you really just have to play. I hate to say this from so far out, but we're just so far out, right? Like, we have to play it by ear. There's a chance that we don't see Nick Chubb at all until October. But again, there's so much risk for complications on top of the fact that data shows running backs coming off of a meniscus injury, they play fewer snaps per game, they see worse efficiency, and they generally play fewer games. So it's just all goes into the pot of the data of a 28, 29-year-old coming off of a multi-ligament injury. The meniscus is the most concerning, but of course the whole thing and the whole picture with Chubb is, I view him in a very similar way that I viewed Javonte Williams last season. Javonte was obviously younger. Javonte obviously had in theory, had a more complex injury, and he came back quickly. He came back at like 10 months, which is pretty quick for the specific injury that he had. So Nick Chubb can come back, but can he come back and be at full strength without persistent swelling, without persistent pain? Is the coaching staff going to give him his full workload? Probably not, right? From a fantasy perspective, I look at Nick Chubb even at like his 6th, 7th round ADP, and I'm just like, why, right? Like, that's when you start taking flyers. That's when you start drafting some of the rookies that are still on the board. That's when you start taking, maybe you still are waiting on a quarterback at that point. Like, maybe that's when you start looking at quarterback, especially if it's best ball, right? Like, that's the range where he's going to fall. It really is going to push him into the dead zone. And I hate to say it. It's great that his injury wasn't as gruesome and as terrible as it looked, and he's going to be playing NFL football again, as far as as of today. But I just don't think that from a fantasy perspective, he's really an investment worth making.
Yeah, that's tough. When you start talking about the 6th or 7th round, you're still looking at some wide receivers that could be doable. And I don't know if I want him. If I were to think about Chubb, I would want to have already had my 2 running backs and have him be like picking him as a flex play or something like that, or even a bench spot if he lasts that long. But I think the name brand value is gonna drive up his cost. It's gonna be tough. This is gonna be a tough one. I hate it because, man, he was one of my big finds in the 2018 season to get when he hit. So buena suerte, wishing Chubb luck, and hopefully he's able to hit some of those incentives and get back to having a career. So, all right, mi amigo, Cultura class time. So I'm going to give a very kind of briefly. Recently, I went to see the Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band from Familia. You all know that I'm a big classic rock fan, but I took a look around at the audience. not a lot of people look like you and me. You know, it was pretty lily white. And so it got me to thinking for a cultura class of what is something that's very non-Latino, that quote unquote white, that we both enjoy doing. I mean, I've already outed the Springsteen. I'm going to be, and of all things, I'm going to go see Billy Joel and Sting together pretty soon, which is going to be another similar. But we'll be on the younger side on that one, so I'm going to like that. But para ti, what are you thinking?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think we'd be navel gazing if we didn't say I host a fantasy football podcast and I'm a fantasy football analyst. I mean, I love all our brothers, right? I love our brothers and sisters that are out in these fantasy football best ball streets, right? You think of some of the biggest names in the game, JJ Zachariason, Rich Rebar, you know, Matt Harmon, Andy Behrens. I mean, that sounds about white. And what are you and I doing here, compadre? We're sitting here hosting a fantasy football podcast. So, but it's okay. We love our white brothers and sisters out there continuing to grind all the content out, and we're grinding content out too. So I think we'd really be missing the boat if I didn't say that in particular.
And you know what? I will say the thing that's been great is the people that you've named have been some of the most supportive people out there in wanting to make sure that more people of color, more people, you know, we're in the cookout group, more people of color are getting opportunities, more women are getting opportunities. And I think that's been great. So that I think is fantastic about the collective familia that we have in the fantasy football community. So that's been good. Oh, that's why we got to get you out to the expo, because then you'll get to see that.
I think I'm going this year. I think this is the year.
Vamos. Love it. All right, compa. Let's get out of here. Let's get these people. Just a quick preview. This was part 1 of our NFL draft series. So we're going to be talking about our next episode next week is also going to be talking about a few more players and position specific on that one. So, but for now, make sure, again, una vez otra vez, you're checking out the Injury Prone Podcast on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, throw a comment in the chat. We're going to have some great content coming up to get you ready, talk about the injuries that people are coming off of. Get that, get into that patreon.com/injuryprone, get in there. And quick shout out to Pro Athlete Physical Therapy at Pro Athlete PT. Right. So compa, you're getting in there, get all the socials, follow him on all the socials, see all the cool stuff that he's doing outside, so that you can see that what our compadre is practicing here with us, he's preaching and practicing with his clients. So any last parting words, compa?
Oh, Pro Athlete Physical Therapy at Pro Athlete Physical Therapy. Make sure you follow me on all the socials. And if you're in Denver, and if you're an athlete and you're active and you've got an injury or you want to prevent an injury, come see me. You can meet me in person. You can see what I'm like in real life and maybe dislike me even more than you do now.
You can see his new haircut too, so that's a good thing too.
So,
yeah, and if you got fantasy football questions, he won't charge you extra for that. So
that's right. I'll charge you double.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias, everybody. And remember, just enjoy the NFL draft, and let's get to it, because then everything's really coming up. Salud.